Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my thoughts on Group C of AFC World Cup qualifying. That is right. The trilogy has now come to an end. If you guys have not seen my thoughts on Group A and B, you should check that out after this video, of course. What you should also do is drop this video a like if you could, and let me know down below in the comments what was your biggest takeaway from all of the teams in Group C. And of course, lastly, hit subscribe so you don't miss the live streams that I'm going to be doing for the next round of qualifying in October and whatever plethora of Asian content I feel like releasing here on YouTube. Normally I do biggest surprise and loser, but for Group C, we're just going to jump straight into the Chinese national team. And I am pretty sure if you look up the word finished in the dictionary, you're just going to see the Chinese logo. I mean, these boys have so little talent, it actually gives me a little bit of sadness. To be a little fair here, I'm going to try to start with the positives for China, okay? I think that their jerseys look absolutely sick. Okay, now we can move on to the negatives. This team is more open at the back than a 7-Eleven. Just looking at the stats here, 28 shots conceded, 12 on target in 2 games. Without any context, that's already horrendous. You're conceding 14 shots a game. But the numbers are even worse when you remember that China was up a man for 70 minutes at home against Saudi Arabia, and they still looked open. I'm not kidding when I say that China probably has the worst front two in Wu Lei and Konishao in all of AFC Round 3 qualifying, and I'm including across all the groups on aggregate. You look at the midfield, and it is hands down the least technical midfield of all the remaining teams, and this team has no ability, no goal-scoring threat whatsoever unless it is off a set piece, which ironically is how they scored their 1 goal against Saudi Arabia, albeit it was an own goal, so they couldn't even do that part correctly. If you ask this version of China to play a sport that somewhat resembles the game of football, they're going to disappoint you. The lack of passing ability, dribbling, even overall athleticism, basic understanding of formational movement has these guys pretty much dead already after 2 games. I'm really not trying to come on here and just beat up on China. I have no beef with the Chinese national team personally, but if there's one team in Group C that does not have even one glimmer of hope, they are so buried they will never see the sunlight again, it's going to be China. Here's a pretty insane stat for you guys. During the last window for China, 16 total shots, 1 on target, bruh. Like, that's by far the worst conversion rate of any team in the group. It's probably the worst conversion rate of any team, period. I'd have to go check the stats from Group A and B. I'm to the point where if I'm Branko Ivankovic, I am genuinely gonna keep the back line, right? I'll keep the back 4, even though they're not very good at doing anything except defending crosses, and I'm going to play in the midfield and the attack the straight-up U23 squad, because you got nothing to lose. You might as well look towards the 2030 World Cup already. It's been mentioned before on the channel that you could debate that Thailand should have been here instead of China, and I guarantee you, bro, I promise each and every one of you guys watching, Thailand is giving us better football. They're more competitive in these matches than what we have seen from China so far. I don't know what type of summoning jutsu they did at the Asian Cup to look somewhat defensively sound, but that version is dead. We are not going to see that China again. To reiterate, there is no silver lining whatsoever with this team, man. How are you going to go and lose 7-0 to Japan, your arch rival, which was by far the worst defeat or the greatest victory if you're on the Japanese side in the history of competitive matches between these two teams, and then losing to Saudi Arabia, 10 men Saudi Arabia at home after you had the lead? I mean, it's inexcusable. I don't know why, but I'm feeling internal anger just talking about this, and I have 0 Chinese blood. Imagine how Chinese national team fans feel about this current deadwood squad, bro. Absolutely terrible. China completely finished. Next up, let's talk about Saudi Arabia here for a second. I saw that Roberto Mancini, before round 3 started, he was quoted as saying that everything is going well with the squad, and I would just love to ask Mancini, how does he feel now? Because after what I just saw in 180 minutes of football, I don't really think things are going well, man. We'll start with some of the problems that I saw with this Saudi team. Number 1, the defense. It's not really doing much right now. I noticed in the Indonesia game especially, which was a 1-1 draw at home, we'll get to that a little bit more later, that the back line could not pass the ball whatsoever. I thought Ali Lajami especially was a disaster. And the fullbacks, Al Ghanam and Al Harbi, they genuinely looked physically outmatched, and this is against Indonesia, for crying out loud. What's going to happen when they play Australia? In addition, the fullbacks didn't overlap enough whenever Saudi Arabia would attack, and I think that outside of Saud Abdulhamid, who's now at AS Roma, which is a massive dub for Saudi football, one of the few dubs recently for Saudi football, there doesn't seem to be that other wide attacking outlet for this team, at least not a fullback or even a winger who has the crossing ability or acumen to actually threaten the opposition position. So I'm kind of forecasting when Saudi Arabia plays Japan twice, which they will do as this round progresses, that I think that Japanese press is going to cause them a lot of problems. Because Indonesia was kind of pressing, but not really. Like, it was pretty much Ragnar and Stroy, two-man pressing the entire Saudi back line, and they were still struggling. What are you going to do when the Japanese come for you? I'm genuinely worried for the Saudis here. Now, the offense, it really is Al-Dasari and Mohamed Kano or bust. Al-Dasari is the dribble guy. He's the one who creates chances off the dribble. Think of him as like the Kyrie Irving for this Saudi Arabian squad. And then Mohamed Kano is the guy who's got to pull the strings passing. Like, I swear to God, he's the only person who can pass more than 10 yards in this team. So I guess he would be Luka Doncic in this metaphor. To be fair, though, I did think that Musab Al-Jawar, who I wasn't really familiar with too much before this window, I did feel like he was a solid option in the midfield, although he didn't start the second game against China despite being one of the better players against Indonesia. So I didn't really understand that. But I guess in the big three NBA metaphor, he's kind of like the Chris Bosh of Saudi Arabia. Now, the problem for Saudi Arabia when you rely on these players so heavily is that when they're not on their game, Saudi Arabia is pretty mid. And Mohamed Kano was not at his best this window, and he obviously got one of the dumbest and most bloodthirsty red cards I've seen in Asian World Cup qualifying. And Al-Dasari genuinely looked like a stormtrooper. I mean, the dude could not score a goal for the life of him. If he scores that penalty against Indonesia and Saudi Arabia go on to win 2-1, then I think a lot of the smoke that's kind of bellowing from the Saudi camp, it at least gets tossed aside for a second. The fire department's going to show up and they're going to put those flames out, okay? But he missed the penalty against Indonesia, and he missed about 3 chances against China that should have made it, even being down a man, a pretty comfortable win. So while I think these guys still have talent, while I still think there's actually a decent amount of talent in this Saudi squad, when the stars aren't there, it's kind of like the Korea complex, right? If Sung Hyo-min and Lee Gang-in aren't on it, if Kano and Al-Dasari and Abdul Hamid are not on it, Saudi Arabia are just another average Asian team, albeit with a pretty solid defense, at least aerially, with guys like Al-Tambakti back there. I will give the Saudis credit in the sense that they really, really fought against China for that victory. I mean, I don't think they did it for Mancini because I think the squad is honestly done with Mancini. I think they would really like another manager to come in, but they did it for the country, right? And the fact that Kadesh, your center back, wins you the game off a brace, I mean, it does look like it was written in the Arabian sky. And you know, the funny thing is that Kadesh's brace in Saudi Arabia eventually winning that game might be negative for the national team in the long run. Because if Saudi Arabia did not win that game, God forbid if they lost, if China won the game 1-0, Mancini's 100% sacked. And when Mancini's sacked, you can probably get in a manager that's a little bit more, how should I say, emotionally invested in the success of this national team. Because I think it's painfully obvious that Mancini is just there for a bag, dude. And I've talked about this on the channel. I know that this is not the golden age of Saudi Arabian football, but there is no argument whatsoever that this Saudi squad is firing at even 90%. They don't even look like they're hitting their 80% capacity. I mean, they look like they're at about 70 to 75% of what they could do under the highest paid manager in the world. It's inexcusable. I don't care that there was a Martin Pies penalty save at home against Indonesia. Like, you cannot be dropping points against any Southeast Asian team at home. It is inexcusable. I don't care if the Saudis had 8 men. So I think morale is low for the Saudis. I think you have a manager who's kind of disinterested, and I think you have a supporting cast that is all out of form, kind of resulting in Saudi Arabia just being painfully average right now. Now, will the China victory and how dramatic it was kind of galvanize Saudi Arabia to be better moving forward? I don't think so. At least anecdotally, when I have seen this with other national teams that I pay attention to closely, namely the Mexican national team, I have not seen results like this, act as a turning point. It's usually, like I said, just the players winning because they want to win, not because of the manager or because they're suddenly a closer group. But I guess we're going to see in the next round because the Saudis have a couple tough games coming up. Moving on to Japan. Now, these boys are just on another level, man. The biggest change from this window for Japan is that Moriyasu changed to the 3-4-2-1 formation. The Machida Shogo Itakura back three proved to be pretty damn good distributing the ball and didn't really face anything defensively. This formation has basically allowed Moriyasu to bypass one of the biggest weaknesses of Japan, and this was very obvious at the Asian Cup, and that is that the fullbacks, while they might be solid defensively, and maybe even guys like Sugawara might be able to provide you some wide offensive threat, it's just not as good as relying on guys like Ritsu Doan and Karu Mitoma to do that work for you. Like, there's no argument, and I think that Moriyasu realized this, to starting guys like Mike Maikuma and having a traditional back four, or God forbid having Hiroki Ito responsible for creating chances, at the Asian Cup, teams basically realized, okay, as long as we let the fullbacks for Japan have the ball and we just bunker down, we're probably okay. Because the cross completion rate of all of Japan's fullbacks is quite honestly abysmal. So this back three eliminates this because now, like I said, you have three very good ball distributing center backs, complemented by Mitoma and Ritsu Doan playing as the wing backs, and then you have the trident of death up top, which can be Kubo, Minamino, Junya Ito, and then the spear tip is Ayase Ueda. Now, to be fair, the Samurai Blue did play China and Bahrain, so let's not get too carried away, right? Like, Japan has been doing this. They've been putting up performances like this for a while now, and here's an absolutely insane stat for you. Since January 1st of 2024, Japan have scored 4 goals or more in 7 out of their 12 total matches. Let me say that a different way for those who may not understand. They are scoring 4 goals or more in 58% of their games this year. That is an absolutely insane rate of goals. To the point where I'm going to reiterate, the only team in Asia that can stop Japan is Japan itself. Unless they self-implode, they're not going to be threatened whatsoever in this round of qualifying. I said it in our recap immediately after the last window that Japan scored 11 goals in all of round 3 last time, and they already have 12 goals through 2 games. And maybe hot take, but I'm going to ride this narrative until the actual tournament arrives. I think they're going to make the semifinal of the 2026 World Cup. Yep, I said it. I think this team is good enough. I think this new formation is beast mode enough to get them results. I think they've already been beating European sides. I think they're already going toe-to-toe with South America's best. I mean, why couldn't they make a semi? Now, the only thing that would make me sell stock in that prediction for Japan is if Hiroki Ito comes back from injury, Moriyasu has a fever dream and decides to play him as a fullback in this kind of midfield 4, or God forbid he goes back to the back 4. As long as that doesn't happen, I think Japan are genuinely unstoppable. Like, they're going full Godzilla -1 right now. Now, a team that didn't manage to take down Godzilla is the Bahrain national team, and I'm going to keep this segment pretty short because I don't think there was that much football to analyze from Bahrain, honestly. I mean, they kind of just defended for their lives for 180 minutes of football, which included a haram ball masterclass against Australia, capitalized by the fact that the goal-winning goal was an own goal scored by Harry Sutar. I mean, you could not have written a better script if you were Bahrain. Against Japan, there was literally no offensive football whatsoever. I mean, across both games in total, Bahrain created 3 chances. But yeah, man, like I said, there's just really not a lot there. I mean, they're going to play in their 4-4-2, and they're going to look kind of annoying, and their goalkeeper's okay, and the center backs aren't that great, and the fullbacks are below average. So what does that result in when round 3 is all said and done? Well, kind of depends on how they look when they play Indonesia, quite frankly. I think if you're trying to create a bull argument for Bahrain going forward and trying to, say that they are going to make that round 4 of World Cup qualifying, or maybe they even finish in the top 2, I don't really know if I would be placing that bet, you would say that they played Japan and Australia, which were 2 of the more difficult games, and now those are out of the way, and when they get to play a China, when they get to play in Indonesia, they get to kind of showcase some of the offensive talent that does exist in this squad, guys like Ali Marhoun, and they might be able to pick up 12 to 13 points from those matches. Now, I personally don't think they're going to pick up 12 to 13 points from those matches because I need to see a little bit more from Bahrain first. I need to see that they can string 5 passes together before I'm going to put my head on a spike like that. Now, I do think Bahrain are just annoying enough and have just enough dark arts in their game plan to where I wouldn't be surprised if they got a draw against Saudi Arabia in the home leg at Rifa. I mean, hell, they could get a draw away at the Abdul Hamid. I mean, Indonesia did that, and Bahrain are probably on the same level defensively as Indonesia, if not maybe a little bit worse now. But that Indonesia game, man, these are going to be really interesting fixtures to watch because I feel like everybody thinks Indonesia's going to take 6, and I just don't see that. I'll get to Indonesia later in this video, but I really think Bahrain is going to at least win one of those games just because of how they play. Should I say how they approach football? Because they don't really play ball, do they? They kind of just clear the ball and foul and annoy you into submission. And hey, I'm not going to fault it. It got you 3 points away against Australia. I mean, it was a magical start to qualifying for Bahrain. If they didn't absolutely succumb to the Japanese onslaught, then maybe they could have walked away from this window with 4 points and they would have been sailing. Now, to focus in for a second on the 5-0 beatdown that they suffered in Rifa against Japan, which is by far Bahrain's worst home loss in World Cup qualifying history and the worst loss against Japan in the history of the fixture manager. I think there are a couple different factors that I want to highlight for why this game played out so differently versus the 3-1 loss against Japan at the Asian Cup. Now, the first reason was already mentioned earlier, but it was the fact that at the Asian Cup, Japan had the 4-2-3-1 formation, and that had a lot of deficiencies, especially with the personnel and all the injuries Japan had going into the tournament and as the tournament went on. And also at the Asian Cup, I think Bahrain at least tried to play some quick counterattacking football. In this World Cup qualifier, I think they bunkered down too hard. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think they showed Japan too much respect, which I think is the same thing that China did. And I understand why Bahrain did that, because up until this point, we had seen Japan kind of struggle against those low blocks, again, given the old formation that they used to use and given the fact that their fullbacks offensively were not that great. So I guess Bahrain didn't check their watch and see what time it was, because with this new formation, the weakness that Bahrain was kind of able to bank on at the Asian Cup no longer existed, and the result was nothing short of a demolition. I think goals are going to be really, really hard to come by for Bahrain. I think this 4-4-2 is just going to be enough to keep games annoying. I don't think they're going to get blown out in too many other games. I just think Japan are just simply too good for the Asian continent right now, and so we'll see what happens moving forward. Australia is the next team that we're going to talk about, and have to highlight from the beginning that Graham Arnold is no longer the manager of the Socceroos. And I gotta be honest, I think he got a little too much blame for the recent results. Yep, that's right. I said it. I'm gonna defend Graham Arnold at least a little bit. I will be the big bad in this situation. Now, did his squad selection have issues? Absolutely. Did Australia look like they didn't know what offensive soccer looked like? Yes. But at the same time, similar questions must be asked of this player pool. Are Mitchell Duke and Yengi more one-dimensional than modern-day pop music? Absolutely. Should Aiden O'Neill, Martin Boyle, Connor Metcalf, and Samuel Silvera face criminal charges for how they performed in these two games? Yes. Like, I'm sorry, we can blame Grant Arnold until the cows come home, but these players were dog shit. Genuinely, I think the only Australian who walks away from the last window not being a massive loser is Alessandro Cercati, who I have to say looks like quite a player. If that guy doesn't start the next 80 games for Australia, something's gone horribly wrong. Otherwise, it was pretty bad for everyone else involved. Although I do think Sutar had a good redemption game against Indonesia after scoring the own goal against Bahrain. Fun fact, Australia had 30 shots and 9 on target in the last window, and the only team that had better than that was Japan. Now, what is the difference, my audience, between Japan and Australia during the last window? Oh, that's right. One team scored 12 goals, and the other scored 0. Like the Socceroos were wasteful as hell. There's no other way to say it. Not only were these dudes shooting blanks the entire window, they had 19 corner kicks, including 15 against Indonesia, and not one goddamn time could you find Cameron Burgess or Harry Sutar or Mitchell Duke to put a header on target. That's the part of this Australia squad where I look at it and I look at the performances and I'm like, okay, Graham Arnold, dinosaur, Velociraptor, sure, but y'all been trash. These players have been ass cheeks, and I don't care if they appoint Tony Popovich or Greg Popovich, they're not going to win any games if these guys don't perform better. I think I tweeted it, and I genuinely mean this. If you took James Ward-Prowse and you put him on the Australian national team, if you gave him an Australian passport, they might be unstoppable, because the set piece delivery that I'm being forced to watch and that the poor Australian fans are being forced to watch from Silvera and Craig Goodwin is shambolic, bro. I feel the same anger boiling up again like when I was talking about China. Like, this could be so simple if y'all could just play ball, man. Now, defensively, Australia are still a juggernaut. Like, this ain't nothing new. Across 180 minutes in the last window, they conceded 4 chances, so that's pretty damn solid. And whenever they have that Keanu Bacchus, Jackson Irvine double pivot, they're just not going to concede a lot of chances to the opposition. The question for me is not, is Australia under threat of being eliminated from qualifying? The question is, can Australia score enough goals to qualify in one of those automatic spots? They got the new guy, Tony Popovich, coming in. Hopefully, he can get this team looking a little bit more fluent offensively, because if not, I just think we're looking for a third place guaranteed unless the Saudis continue to fumble and Australia just doing things the Aussie way. And the last team that we're going to talk about finally is the Indonesian national team. And regardless of what I say after this, I must preface everything by saying it was a very good window for them. Now, pretty much every single stat that you look at after 2 games would indicate that Indonesia is on a crash course to finish 4th in this group and advance to the 4th round of AFC qualifying, which would be an astronomical dub. I think I've said it 30 times. I'll say it for the 31st time now. Give Shin Tae-yong a lifetime contract. I do not care if they make it to round 4 and then get bodied. Give him a contract. In the end, Indonesia's future, their destiny, will be decided in the 4 matches against Bahrain and China. And I say that because those matches in those games cannot play out the same way that it did against Australia and Saudi Arabia. Against the bigger teams, Indonesia can do what Indonesia does best, which is sit back, absorb pressure, and just harass the other team. They will not be able to approach the game that same way against Bahrain and China because Indonesia might be the team with the ball. And what we've seen through the 2 games so far is that offensively, this Indonesian squad is still extremely limited. Like Ragnar, the dude might be a cross-country marathon runner, but he's not really a creator. I mean, if you look at the stats, even though Marcelino only started one of the games, he still led the team in chance creation. Overall, I think the right side of Indonesia, whether it's Marcelino, Arnold, or even Sandy Walsh as kind of that overlapping fullback, I think there's enough offensive threat on that side to be okay, but I'm looking at the left side of the pitch and I'm looking at the midfield and I'm saying there's not really a Cam in this team. Now that is not necessarily a death sentence for Indonesia because while they don't have that creative midfielder, what they do have is a team and a midfield especially that is full of athletes. Like if there is one thing that has changed the most from all of this influx of kind of these Dutch Indonesian players into this team is that one, the overall kind of base technical level of this team has increased. But bigger than that, in my opinion, the athleticism. You look at guys like Ivan Jenner, Hubner, Ragnar, Tom Hay. These guys are athletes. And while I don't think that they have anywhere near the technical ability of the Japanese midfield or the Korean midfield or maybe even the Saudi midfield, they're going to run. And because of that, they're going to be winning more and more of these duels. Like we saw it against Saudi Arabia. I think that the Saudis looked a bit ignorant. They looked like they weren't ready for Indonesia to look as strong and as physical as they were, and it caused a lot of problems. You take the 5-4-1 formation that Shin Tae-yong used in the last window, and let's just assume that they're going to use it for the rest of qualifying going forward. You have 3 CBs, guys like Idziz and Rizky especially, who are very strong in the air. You have fullbacks for the first time probably in Indonesian history who are good defending one-on-one. You got dogs in the midfield, and you got 2 guys up top in Ragnar and Struijk who are just going to run. Like, they're going to be tough. I think I said this in my prediction. Maybe I didn't, but the days of the kind of cheap Indonesian goals, I think those are over, especially when you add Martin Pais, who was incredible between the sticks. I mean, look at the goal that they scored against Saudi Arabia. What happened? There was a little bit of congestion in the midfield because they have the 2 central mids kind of tucked in, and the Saudis tried to play a ball through the middle. It was picked off. They countered quickly up the wing. Ball came into Ragnar, and it was somewhat of a lucky shot that went in, but the Indonesians won't care. I can see them scoring a couple more goals like that against the bigger teams. I just need to see, because I don't have a goddamn clue, what they're going to look like when Indonesia is the favored side. Because again, being honest, I think Indonesia, at least offensively, played like 50 minutes of good football in the last window, and that would include the first 25 minutes of both games. And this is another problem. I think Indonesia, they start really hot. They start on the front foot even, especially against Australia. Like, they genuinely had the Socceroos pinned back for the first 20 minutes. Australia couldn't even get out of their own box. And then it's like this switch is flipped, and I don't know if it's because of the humidity. I don't know if it's just problem with conditioning, but the level for Indonesia after the 25-minute mark, I mean, it takes a significant dip. So I think Shin Tae-yong, one of his main objectives is going to be like, okay, how can we maintain this level of intensity? If not for the full 90 minutes, at least for 45. Because if they can play really, really well for an entire first half of football, maybe poach a goal lead and then sit back, I think they're going to get wins against Bahrain and China. And ultimately, that is the question. Where are the goals going to come from for Indonesia? Because can they draw their way to round 4? I don't know. It kind of depends on how Bahrain and China do. I mean, China are finished, right? But if China can play party pooper and get 2 draws against Indonesia, then all of a sudden, those games against Bahrain mean everything. And that really has always been the fixture that would decide Indonesia's fate in this group. But if Bahrain takes 6 against China and Indonesia only takes 4, then it's advantage Bahrain. If Indonesia only pick up a couple draws against China or they lose their remaining games against the best teams in this group, then it might be advantage Bahrain again. So this is going to be the matchup to watch. match. These are the comparisons that will, again, I've said it 15 times, decide the fate of both Indonesia and Bahrain. But guys, that is the video. Those are my thoughts. I'm very, very curious to see how things change from round 1 to round 2 in October for all of these sides, right? And I'm going to be monitoring that closely. I will be back here on the channel to do a similar kind of group by group takeaway, winners and losers, hot takes, all that good stuff here on the channel. So if you want to see that, make sure you hit subscribe. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure you drop it a like and let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. And also check out our social media. I forgot to say this at the beginning of the video. God damn it. Links in the description because I like to post polls on our story and kind of get a pulse check of how you guys feel about the power balance within Asian football. So you guys are awesome. I appreciate it for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one.